All right. Hey, Rick. Hey, Jake. Welcome to the webinar today. Excited to chat with both of you.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Awesome. So I know people are coming in. I can already see the participant number go up. We are going to give everyone another a minute to join and we will get started. I'm really excited about this webinar today. We've gotten some questions offline already from some people who were not able to join. But yeah, so let's see how many questions we get today. And then from there, we can always uh, ask the offline questions if you have time. So today's topic is actually pretty interesting, the expanding privacy liability landscape. I think on the regulatory enforcement litigation side, both on the Europe and US side, there have been a lot of changes, especially in US with all the state laws, all the CIPA litigations, the enforcements by regulators and state AG. It is quite an interesting time. So there are a lot of updates for us to go through. Essentially, a lot of the focus is on websites, mobile app, data flows. So we're going to touch a lot of these interesting topics. For some housekeeping items before we start, for everybody's reference, the webinar is being recorded, and we will send a recording of webinar to everyone. If you have questions, there is a Q&A. There should be a Q&A section at the bottom of your Zoom panel. You can ask them there. You can also put them, you can also use the chat freely. I am going to monitor the Q&A section. So in case there are any questions, feel free to ask them. We will take some questions as we go along. There's also a dedicated Q&A towards the end. And before I kickstart, today's session is going to be more of a conversation. So we're going to simulate certain scenarios as real life scenarios and then see how Rick and Jake respond to it. So with that, we'll start the webinar. I'll go first and introduce myself. Hey everyone, I'm V. I'm the founder and CEO of Privado.ai. Privado is a product privacy management platform. It scans your websites, mobile app, any digital experiences your company has built to help you comply with privacy laws. By scanning your websites, we can tell you if the consent experience on your website is working, help you prevent litigations like CIPA and VPPA, and also prevent any sensitive data leaks. With that, I'm going to pass on to Rick for his introduction and then Jake from there.
Thank you, V, and thank you for putting this together. And thanks, Jake, for coming on. So Rick Borden, I'm a partner at Frankfurt Kurnit, practicing in data strategy, privacy, cybersecurity, tech transactions, AI, all this stuff related to data and what we're talking about today. I have a long career both at firms and in-house, and I'm dealing with these issues on more than a daily basis.
Thanks, Rick. What do you, Jake? Jake, you're on mute in case you are saying something.
Oh, dang, starting off strong. Yeah, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Jake Ottenwaelder. I started Integrative Privacy about a year ago. My main goal is to allow for privacy engineering to become more of a fractional service across the industry. We've seen a significant rise, as we'll talk later, with privacy regulations. And a big part of that is making sure that your engineering teams understand how to actually implement your legal recommendations or legal recommendations and requirements. So I support a lot of that work for a variety of different customers, and I'm super happy to be here with Privado and talking about this topic today.
Awesome. So for today's panel, essentially, we have an interesting panel because we have Rick, who has great experience both in terms of dealing with the regulations, even with certain regulators and understanding the law. And then we have someone from the web dev engineering side, implementation side, who's in the weeds of taking the guidance from someone like Click and trying to implement it. So we're going to try to use some real life scenarios to surface the friction, how these people can work better, what are the common pitfalls, a lot of interesting things. So as we do that, I'm going to stop sharing and throw my first set of questions. Again, feel free to look at the Q&A section, drop questions, and we'll pick them up. So the first question to you, Rick, is overall from a regulatory environment, what have you seen as the big changes that privacy teams should notice and work towards?
Yes, this has been going on for a little while. So first, we have a lot more laws coming into play and regulations. There are larger and larger teams of regulators that we're seeing. In some states, California, that people know about and think about. Texas is very active, so don't think about this as one political way or another here in the US. And then Connecticut, New Jersey, they've got large teams that are actually very, very focused on this. They are also, the thing that is most interesting to me is they're getting very technically savvy. And they're looking at what's happening within environments, and they are making determinations on that based on their outward view. They're bringing in technology to look at it. They're looking at what's happening with data flows, and they're coming to companies and saying, we are seeing something that you're doing that's wrong. Or they're then sending out sweep letters to say, tell us what your practices are. And those are things that you need to be very careful of because you don't want to provide incorrect information. It sets off this scramble at companies when that happens. And then there's litigation. There's also, I should say that we're seeing a rise of litigation, especially on the CPPA side. We'll talk about that. That's California Invasion of Privacy Act, which is wiretapping. The internet is wiretapping, but those cases are are all over the place. And it's just driven up the regulatory and liability risk. And that when that happens, it creates a need for people like Jake and for what you guys are doing to help to reduce that risk.
That makes sense. Thanks for the remarks. I'm sure we'll go into some of these things as we simulate some of these scenarios. Jake, on your side, I would love to understand, as you implement CMPs, cookie banners, look at websites, what's the state of website privacy? And if you can talk about one or two broad issues that you see in implementation, that would be great.
Yeah, I think with the increased, I think one of the main areas is businesses still want to be able to make money and still want to track and still want to like be able to do this kind of analytics and tracking individuals and be able to do advertising. And in a lot of cases, they have their rights to kind of do that. The challenge comes when the advertising technology starts to try to circumvent some of the uh, cookie technology or tries to circumvent some of the regulations that we're trying to put in place. So there's a rise of like cookieless tracking for a while. That was this fancy new thing that everybody was talking about because it would get around your need for cookies. But really, we're seeing now that's just going to be kind of it's all encompassing. The regulations are being written and updated so that it does include all like kind of cookieless tracking. And so we have to continue to kind of monitor and make sure that we're on top of kind of what the business is trying to do versus what the regulations are. And I think that's where having technology and having a team in place can actually make privacy more of a differentiator for you instead of taking the big sledgehammer to your website and just shutting down all cookies and shutting down all tracking. Having somebody who has like a very strong legal privacy background and having technology that enables your business to have a much finer scalpel when you come in to have these different regional experiences, understand and be able to target your website to specific regions within the US and internationally gives you a lot better data that you can kind of pull from and collect. The
And
other area that I see is really this like false sense of privacy and this false sense of like confidence in the technology implementations, especially when we look at what I consider like the legacy consent management platforms. They have they have I'll just pick out a name maybe off the top of my head like um, to trust maybe. So when you have like companies like that who are providing kind of CMP services, their platforms kind of focus on cookies and require or leverage other platforms outside of theirs to do other regulations outside of just cookies. And so when a company comes in and thinks that they've implemented their consent management software correctly, they then have this false sense of security or false sense of confidence in that implementation. And it's tough to find the right technology to really gauge and understand and have a true picture, kind of like an outside audit of your website to get a better understanding as to what's actually going on and whether your CMP is actually working properly.
Yeah, so thanks, Jake. I just wanted to jump in because a couple of things that you said. It is legal to still do these activities, to do advertising, to do analytics, to understand things about your customers. What we're so you can do this.
Yeah.
The what we're seeing is that you have to do it the right way, and that you have to honor some of the choices that people are making. Now, a lot of the consent management platforms, I'm not going to talk about any of the ones in specific, they were built for GDPR, which is why we have cookie banners, all of those things. The rules in the US are similar but different.
Mhm.
And you have differences in California and Colorado and Virginia and Connecticut and Montana and some of the other states, Texas, that if you want to be as open as you can and collect as much of this data and get as much value from that, you're going to try to do things in different ways. This is when the technology fails you, because it's hard to get that right. And the thing that what we're seeing is that the regulators expect the companies to understand what's going on in the technology, and that the company is the one, not any of the vendors, not the people who give you the cookies or pixels or SDKs, not the consent management platforms, that it is your responsibility to address these things. Now, you can say, oh, this is too hard and I'm not going to do it, which is fine. That's a business decision. It depends upon how you monetize and all of that. But we have a lot of clients that don't want to do this. Oh, and I do need to say, these are all my opinions, not the firm's, and I'm not giving legal advice today. Sorry, I needed to say that. So the key thing, and I think what we're going to talk about now is, okay, in this complex environment, how do you get this stuff right? Where are the regulators looking? And how do, so I tell the team, okay, here's what you need to do for California. Okay, now, how do they get that to happen when they're already doing something for GDPR, or they're doing this, or how do they get that to actually happen? And then how do they know if it's working? That's to me the key. I can give advice all the time, but if it's too complicated and they don't know, they're going to get in trouble, even if they're trying to do things the right way.
Awesome. No, great points. And just to like quick on some points, and we're going to go to our first scenario next is, so I mean, Rick, you made some great point in terms of, I think we've also observed the same at Privado, not only in US, across the board, even in Europe, regulators have large technology auditing teams now, which are actually very technical savvy, as you were saying, and they're running sweeps, they're sending letters. And that's like, once you get a letter, then you have to represent yourself, right? Because now maybe they know something more than you do, which is actually a pretty bad place to be in if you work in privacy and the regulator knows more about your website than you. I think the second thing which you talked about, which I think was made clear in an FTC decision as well is like, of course, company has the final responsibility. You can't hide behind an intern or say that CMP did not do the job, right? It's you, your implementation. And from Jake, your perspective, I think that false sense of privacy makes a lot of sense, both in terms of saying set and forget, in terms of any CMP, right? Any cookie banner, like ultimately it's your implementation of the CMP, and you or your web development team takes certain decisions on optimizing, right? So if you're optimizing for speed, you might want CMP to load in a certain way, or you might use a tag manager, which means CMP works in a different way. So it's your implementation that set and forget is a problem, both in terms of the CMP and also in terms of new technology. As new marketing technology gets added, like you said, cookieless tech, again, you can't have set and forget because they might not be covered in your the way your CMP is implemented. So great points on both sides. I wanted to take a realistic scenario of you hear about a lot of these companies getting like SEPA litigation, right? So imagine a scenario where a company or someone gets a SEPA litigation, and again, we are not giving any legal advice, but we're trying to play a scenario. What's the next step? Like they approach you, how do you respond to it? And once you are building that guidance, Jake, the question to you is then how do you take that guidance to help Rick better in defending the SEPA litigation? So maybe Rick, you can start, and Jake, you can jump in.
Yeah, so hopefully you're asking us these questions before you get the litigation notice, because there are some things that we'll talk about that you can do up front. Once you get it, likelihood, because of how these things work, they price them below the cost of litigation generally. So you're going to end up paying. That's what, if you get the letter, you're going to be very frustrated because you don't think that this is right. And a lot of people agree with you, but you're going to end up paying. That's the reality of it. So the real question is, how do you prevent it? Well, you give notice and consent, and you get somebody to opt into the use of the usually advertising cookies, and Pixels will put some other ones in there in terms of the consent, which is why we're seeing more cookie banners in the US, because that's that opt-in things. But then you have to get them to work right. Like the cookie or the pixel can't fire before the consent banner comes up and you make the choice. Because if it does, then you're still in that lawsuit. Now, there are some things going on where that lawsuit may change. California is even talking about changing their law to address it. There have been some court cases, because a lot of us think that it doesn't make any sense. But if you get it, you call your lawyer and say, okay, what do I do now? And the lawyer's going to be like, okay, I'll settle this for you. But then the next call is, okay, how do we stop this in the future? So the way I say that is, okay, let me find out what's happening with the cookies on the website, and then let's call somebody like Jake, or have you bring on my call, because you're paying me to be on the phone for this now. Let's bring somebody like Jake onto this call, and let's talk about how we get those consents in place the right way. So Jake, to you.
So Jake, like the question really is, now the call is set. How do you collect that data? Like manually, maybe you have also used a tool like Privado, so you can refer that, and yeah, what would you take that in that call?
Yeah, I've had to learn a little bit more how to like read these like legal litigations, because a lot of times when I get the calls from the legal team, they know what the legalese is, but then they ask like, okay, what is this actual technology? What are we doing, and where is it? And so that's usually the first kind of question. So I'll try to kind of identify where this is, and what the prevalence of this cookie or data flow is. So
there are some of us who understand it.
there are some of us, yeah,
We
I
can
know.
we can have a conversation.
You're probably one of the more technical legal minds that I get to work with, but a lot of times we end up with having to either read some of it myself or get a better gauge as to like what's going on. And also some of these regulations or inquiries also just don't have a lot of details, so it does take a lot of just like discovery almost when they don't have like the right name or potentially like where it's coming from or any kind of evidence that it's actually there. So there's some element of discovery that we have to do. Um, but yeah, when that call comes through, my first question is kind of what's the overall risk? What's the um, where is this coming from, and what data is actually flowing into this system? So the the dev tools in your browser are my best friend at this point, and so I'll be on the call looking through the data flows, where that pops up, what the timing is of that, and trying to give a better accurate picture. And I'll usually go through some simulations with like a VPN as to like, okay, what regions are we seeing this? What areas does it go through? And it is pretty time consuming, especially when again, if you don't have a tool like Privado and Privado, I would say is really one of the only tools out there that can do this level of scanning that I would have to do kind of manually otherwise. But looking through kind of what the data flow is, where is this data flowing through, and what's the order of how this was like deployed on the system. I've dealt with Facebook pixels that get dropped by kind of other platforms as well that come onto the page. So it's a sub-processor of a sub-processor in some instances. And those can be very complicated to identify and kind of work through. But that's my main point is, and my first piece on that call is what's our risk? Where is this living right now? And trying to get that information over so that we can understand kind of the scale at that point.
Yeah, and you put in some interesting points. So yeah, two technologies that you have to rely unless you use Privado VPN to make sure you're in the right geography, because based on the location, these banners function differently. And then the second is developer console, which if people have experience with it, it looks pretty scary. I was trying to put an image here, but somehow I was not able to, but it's, yeah, you can try to look at the developer console. So that's a great point. Follow-up question on here to Rick. Which is kind of like another question which I came in the offline questions was, what about regulators approaching the company, not just SEPA? So SEPA is one part, which is litigation, but there are like the California, the Texas AG, all these regulators. How are they doing it, and how do you handle that?
Yeah, so that's a great one. Thanks. The SEPA stuff, when it comes in, it's not very sophisticated. They just throw some stuff up and say you're wiretapping. When the regulators come in, we've had this happen. We had it happen in area of SDKs, not just website, but mobile app. They had used some very sophisticated. It took us months to figure out what they had done, but they used very sophisticated techniques to look at the data flows, and they had more information about the data flows than we did, than the client did. And we had to then back out, come up with a way of, so we had to figure out what they were doing so we could simulate it. And when we finally on a call, we were able to say, oh, wait, we're going to do this. And they were like, yes, that's what we want. You do that. Okay. So then we have a better idea of data flows. Okay. It's taken months at this point for us to figure that out and to respond to the regulators in the language that they're using with us. So they are technically savvy. If you don't have the ability to figure out what's happening in at least as good a way as they do, you are behind, and they are going to start to think that you're a bad actor. Turns out that's not always what's going on. The company may have tried to do things, they may have made mistakes, whatever it is, but the longer that it takes for you to figure it out and respond to it, the worse it is. And they are very, very sophisticated in the way that they're doing it, at least some of these regulators. So, you know, we get approached and they've got slides of data elements and things that are happening and violations and big, big, big numbers on the screen that we then have to try to back off of and get them to a place where they are going to settle for something more reasonable, because we're settling it. You're not very hard to fight these things. You need a very, very, very large budget to do that. So that's a worse scenario than the SEPA litigation, and we're seeing more of this. The sweep letters also, they require you to, they are sending them because they've seen things in the industry. And if you respond in ways that they are not happy with, that they're not looking for, they don't have the right type of response for them, then they're going to start asking harder and harder questions.
Yeah.
And it might become enforcement. So then I'm turning to you guys and Jake to provide more information. And, you know, if the lawyer isn't as technically savvy, then doing that translation is even harder.
Yeah, and you're hit with all that information at the front. Like you said, you have to back out of all of that. And if you don't have the context around, like you said, speaking the language that they're looking for, that shows the expertise, that shows the forethought. But then also, I think you touched on a great point of, especially with a lot of these regulations and what things are happening and on the external side of like your website with cookies and data flows, a lot of regulators are seeing that as like an overall health check of maybe your entire processes internally as well. So we look at trying to fortify that almost shell and the protection around the company with your consent banners and making sure that your tracking is proper as a means to keep regulators from asking even deeper questions and even more difficult questions around how are you deleting data, which is entirely different topic and extremely challenging to do correct. But putting up and making sure that you're controlling kind of the external view is extremely important. And that's where, like I said, I want to focus on what's the prevalence and risk of this overall, because that can show more about the internal workings of the company.
Awesome. Thanks, Jake and Rick, for this. I have a bunch of questions based on your talk track, but we have some questions from the audience itself, which I'm going to pick up. And Jake, before I go there, I completely agree with your point. Like the way we like to, even when we talk to customers in terms of maturity, is kind of your front of office and your back office. You know, if you're like, your company is like a retail outlet, like your website and mobile app are like, you know, completely visible showrooms to your regulators and users. If they find things they're messy there and they then go to the back office, that's a lot of cost to maintain a privacy program, because now your deletion, you know, you will have to attest every few months on, yeah, the deletion is happening. We have contracts with each vendor. So yeah, I would say like one of the things that you should do immediately is make sure you are not easy targets. Your web and app, at least, like your user facing, something that, as Rick, you were mentioning, and it's kind of scary that the regulators are so technical that they're generating so much evidence when they're talking to or sending these sweeps, is at least those you should have a good grasp of. And yeah, at no case, the regulator should not know more than, you know, your internal privacy teams. So that makes a lot of sense. So some follow-up questions, Rick. The first one is for SEPA violation. Maybe we'll do that and then go to the sweep ones. So the question is, when it comes to SEPA violations, are they primarily concerned with tracking for targeted advertising purposes, or does it also extend to internal analytics?
I mean, most of it really is the targeted advertising, but that doesn't mean that when they're looking at it, that the plaintiff's lawyer and their technical advisor get this right. So you may end up with the letter, and it may be cheaper to actually settle it than to go and fight that issue and try to get yourself out of it. Now, we're doing a lot of these, and our litigators have established relationships with the plaintiffs' firms. So we'll actually go to them sometimes and say, nah, this one's not right. They're not doing what you said. We can show you that, and they'll drop it. So we do have the ability to do that sometimes, but it's not clean and easy.
Yeah, Rick, I've heard or at least read like some of these screen recording tools to be there. Sometimes analytic to SDKs like like Segment, Full Story, Hotjar, these to be there. And they're not tracking, right? They are like basically for analytics. So what's the I mean, should that be part of the initial like things that you'd want consent on, or what's your analysis
Well,
there?
yeah, so once we're getting consent, we sweep in. We put in a lot of things into the consent so that it's clear what it is that they're doing if they're going to the website, and that there are certain things that they consent to, certain things that they don't, and it's clear what it is that's going on, similar to the FNCC's cookie banners, right? Where you have essential, and then you have the non-essential, and you make the choices based on that. So it's moved, these litigations have moved us to that European standard, which doesn't really apply legally in the US except because of these types of cases, unless you're doing sensitive data. Sensitive data is a different story, and we can, we'll talk about some of those things.
Yeah. Another question, which is like, what are some examples of what regulatory sweeps have found so far? Again, we don't need to name a company specific one, or maybe I can later, but yeah, some examples that, we have seen so far.
Well, so California announced a sweep in March, so we don't know the results of it, and I don't know if we'll see if they report results of it. There are clients who have to respond to this, but it's around location data. And there have been a lot of issues with location data. There was a big breach. It's a public company called Gravy Analytics had a breach, and there was location data in there, and there were reports that that's companies, there were companies listed where the location data had come from their apps. So, it is not entirely clear everyone who's gotten a letter around location data, and what California is doing with those responses. But the FTC is focused on location data, and including the new chair of the commission. Texas is, California is. So that's a public sweep. We don't have answers to all of that yet.
Awesome. Makes sense. Thanks for answering that. A few more examples we've seen recently is around like just the dark patterns. So, I mean, that's more on the enforcement. So there's the sweep and there's the enforcement as well. My assumption is the enforcement also guides the next level of sweep or internally. So yeah, right. So basically, so there's dark patterns, there's been data sharing has been a big one. Even like consent experience, which didn't work, has been another one. On the Europe side, if your company operates there, like ICO, I think specifically maybe in the last IPP, the commissioner had said they're going to send sweep to the top 10,000. I read maybe the Dutch TPA is doing the same. The French regulator again did the same. So yeah, like the basic, does your banner have all the right buttons? The colors are fine. The banner actually works. Things like that also.
Yeah, and really, they don't have to send sweep letters for this, right?
Yeah.
California, they'll just go on. I mentioned California because we talked to the AG's office on a regular basis, and we have talked to the CPPA as well. They'll go onto websites and look at them, right? They'll see whether the buttons are symmetrical. They just did an enforcement on symmetrical buttons. They don't need to send a sweep letter for that. They'll just go and do it, and they'll see it's wrong, and they might send an enforcement or investigatory letter after that. But then they're looking at other things, right? Like fix the easy stuff, because you don't want to give them a reason to start looking for other things, because it's very rare that you do everything correctly.
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to technology. It's really impossible to work for every single edge case. So again, you just want to have a better understanding of, yeah, exactly what you're saying.
Absolutely. And there's one more question, which is another interesting one. And yeah, I mean, I'll ask the question both for you, Jake, and Rick, for you. So Rick, for you, the question is essentially like when regulators are using technology or people to check tracker activity or whether the website is compliant, what rules are they using? Are they using jurisdictional requirements? Are they using frameworks like IAB TCF? Especially, let's say if the company is more on the publisher side, wherein you have these frameworks. And then the question for you, Jake, is when you are auditing for your implementation, for your customers or any of that, what's the framework you are using and how do you go about that?
So what are the regulators doing? They're using their law and they're in the interpretation of their law. So they're not necessarily using a standardized framework or something like that to do it. And we don't know what the tools are that they're using to look at this. They don't tell us. So we have to try to figure out, and by the way, we know and they know sometimes their information's wrong. Like they may see something and they may be misinterpreting it. And usually they're willing to engage in that conversation. I'll just say that engaging in that conversation means that you're in a bad place. That there's that they're focusing on some, like if we have to get on a call with the AG's office, it's not going to just go away usually unless we can show them that they're completely wrong and everything's right. They don't do it unless they have an intention to take it further and find more information. So we don't know. What we do know though is that if we are able to provide concrete information about what's being done, that uses independent tools or providers outside of the company, and to give them information that shows that the company is acting in good faith, is making the right efforts to comply, and hopefully actually is in compliance. But even without that, having a record of what you've tried to do and how you really made those good faith efforts, having policies, procedures, testing it, looking at these things, documenting what you did, all of these types of things that annoy technical groups, annoy companies to no end, but that's your defense. That's your defense against the regulators. That's your defense against the plaintiff's lawyers. And it seems annoying at the beginning, but if you do these things, you then save a lot of money later.
Okay, Rick. So, Jake, I'm really sorry. I'm going to go off topic because we got an offline question on this, especially. The question was really, for example, technologies like Privado, which built this audit trail and helps companies, like you said, it's a defense. But one of the questions is, if we know, then we have to fix it. How about we don't know? Isn't that a better strategy? And that's something that we've also heard sometimes in calls is like, hey, now I know it, I have to fix it. If I didn't know it, then maybe I didn't have to fix it. What's your opinion there, based on your experience, of course?
Okay, so if we're talking about websites, there are a lot of public tools, Ghostery being one of them, right? That's what we used before we started to play around with Privado. There are just a lot of things where they can see what's going on, at least to some extent. They're going to see this stuff. And then if you have any sort of tool that is even more sophisticated than that, which they do, they're buying these tools. When they start looking, they're going to find it. I don't believe that putting your head in the sand and saying, well, we don't know about it, because that is not a defense. I can tell you very directly that the regulators, we had a situation, an investigation where the the publisher of some of these cookies, pixels, and SDKs, their documentation was really real, and multiple of them were really bad, might even be dark patterns. It was very confusing. There may not be a good way to implement them in some cases at all to be compliant. And the regulator said, oh yeah, we understand that. We get that. You're still responsible.
Yeah.
So, right, I mean, you can hope that the regulator doesn't look at you. That is, if you are looking to have something that is widely available, that people are going to be talking about, that is really hot, they're going to look at it. Or there's a good chance that they'll look at it. I wouldn't. I mean, my risk calculation wouldn't be that, but you know what? Hey, I'm the lawyer. So I take different
And also,
risks
it's not
than other
just
people.
the regulators, it's also the users who can complain. It's also the litigation that can happen. So it's all these other people who can do the same thing. It's not the regulator.
That's true. I'm an advocate of selling into privacy regulations. There's a reason I'm this is not a client, I'm not, but there's a reason that Apple's ads have the stem of the apple be locked now and go like this, and it's privacy. They sell privacy. Well, in this age, privacy has become such a hot topic that everybody's talking about it. Sell into it, but that means you have to do it well.
Makes sense. Awesome. Over to you, Jake, then. So the question really for you is, how are you testing? Are you looking at jurisdiction requirements, IBTCF, implementation?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of what you guys are saying is very accurate. I mean, this is all publicly available information as well. Like, this is not anything that requires somebody to be inside the organization. And to the most recent question, I would just say, like, even if you don't know, or if you're trying to keep your head in the sand, doesn't mean that there wasn't somebody on the marketing team who wanted to load this, or who made the decision elsewhere. So it's not just that you're trying to not understand maybe from your own perspective, but you have to also take into account what everybody in the organization's doing and what that process looks like as well. And that's really where I start off my discovery work as like a privacy engineer or coming in as a consultant. My main goal is to take like a very holistic approach to how we tackle privacy at the organization. So meeting with and understanding kind of every different group within the organization that touches privacy, and getting a gauge on what their education level is as it comes to privacy, what the trainings are, and like you said, starting off at the documentation level, being able to document what things are being used for, and you had a great example of like Hotjar and some of these other platforms, pixels and cookies can be used for a lot of different things. And when we look at regulations, they're either going off of what was previously litigated. For instance, I believe like the Facebook pixel Facebook was already fined for their wiretapping. And so I've seen clients reach out saying that we're now getting litigation because we also are using the Facebook pixel, and they're referencing Facebook's own indiscretions there. So understanding kind of what the regulatory landscape is, and then really trying to understand how the technology is being used within the organization to get that context. Because in a lot of cases, as Rick said, if we can prove that this is not being used for what they say it is, that's a great opportunity. It is also very difficult to do that, but you need to have the documentation kind of in place to do it. Otherwise, yeah, that's kind of where I think each organization is so unique, and doing all their own processes. They've built their own ecosystem. They've built their own infrastructure. I can't go into one system and tell them that they're using Salesforce in one way and not another just by looking at the cookies. We really have to dive into the documentation, understand how the business operates, and then be able to bubble that up in a coherent and easily understood way within the privacy notices or cookie policies, or even the radical transparency of like providing a list of all the cookies and data flows that you have on
Cookies.
your site, being able to accurately tag those and keep that up to date. that helps regulators to understand, like, okay, we are seeing a LinkedIn pixel on this that is being used for recruiting and it's not being used for advertising. Little stuff like that and how we can kind of prove it. That kind of helps, but it's very complicated. It takes a lot of technical conversations to also make sure that you're getting it right. Because you also don't want to present things that are inaccurate as well. And so I probably I'll popcorn it back to Rick, but there's probably been a lot of instances where the engineering teams have told you one thing and then you've had to either dispute that or find out that that's not true, and that puts the entire company at a larger risk because they're not really going off of kind of the factor or present day.
Yeah,
Yep.
you're absolutely right, Jake. I so often I'll get a client team telling me, oh, we're not doing this. We're not doing targeted advertising. We're not using this in this way. And then we see something there and they go back and they talk to their marketing team. They're like, oh, wait, somebody actually made an affirmative decision to do this. So then you have two problems. One, your privacy policy doesn't reflect it. So then you're telling people one thing, but doing another. That is actually where you get in a lot of trouble, because it doesn't matter if what you're doing is legal. If your privacy policy is wrong, you're liable. So, and then you've collected data that you don't have the right to use, and what do you do with that, and how long has this been going on? And it creates a whole mess. And that can be very expensive to dig out of, because you may have to get rid of data. So that's an issue. And then you may find out that there were, mistakes made on the development team where they didn't understand what they were supposed to be doing and why, and that creates other kinds of issues, especially if you're using a third-party developer.
Absolutely. So thanks, Jake and Rick, for answering all of that. What I thought was I'll also we discussed a lot of challenges, propose a solution, which is, Privado has a web auditor tool. So for everyone who is here, feel free to put questions in the Q&A section. I'll pick them up. But one of the main things that we realized was that for privacy, it's surprising how many people have keys to their website, which means they can change stuff. So we built Privado for exactly that, essentially do an outside-in scan, what a regulator is doing, and give a lot of information back. So as I show these things, if Rick or Jake, you want to jump in for any specific, feel free to do that. So for this, we have a specific website that we have created so we can demonstrate. So this is no real client's data, but the issues are pretty real. So as we run a scan on the websites, we end up first generating a trend of what your active issues are. So starting from, hey, what's the compliance score on my website? And then over time, are you increasing issues? So are your number of issues going up or are they going down, right? So you can kind of first start to see that and build that, prove to regulators your privacy program is working and you're actually improving things. The second is this compliance completion score gives you a very simple insight on what the issues are on your website. So for example, one of the questions about what do you look against? So the first thing, for example, for California, you can look against is, hey, is my GPC signal working? If a user puts in a GPC signal, do we honor it? And we have two checks for that. So one is a super simple cookies check. Another is a tracker check. So if you look at tracker, it will give you issues saying, hey, you have all these advertising third parties firing, for example, TikTok ads. And then it'll tell you actually the script responsible for it. So essentially Google Tag Manager loads all these pixels and you can either see it here or you can see it here. The main thing is the conversation that Jake wants to do, instead of investing a lot of time in doing this manually, you can run a scan in Privado, get this information, send it to Jira, ask their web dev or marketing team to fix, because now they know. You can also do the same for California. And then there was a lot of conversation around data flows and third parties, right? So in Privado, again, that investigation is super easy to do. So you can first choose a country. So I'm going to say California or region, and then say, I want to only see things when a user opts out. So you filter that out. And then from here, you can see all the third parties that are firing, pick any one of them and say what data goes to TikTok ads. And in this case, actually, quite a lot of data goes to TikTok ads, browsing history, language, cookie, things like this. Also, location data was a big thing. So that was another thing you can look the same in Privado. If is there location data going or IP address going, and once you click here, it'll tell you where it flows. So in this case, it's actually going to Cloudflare. So that's kind of a very quick overview. There's a lot of things in Privado. I have put on the chat, I've put a free consent report. In case anyone is interested, our team can generate one and send it over, show you on a live call, or send a report. Either way is fine. I know, Jake, you were trying to jump in, and Rick, feel free to do that as well.
Yeah, I was going to jump in because the consent actions is where I think this is a great technology and option. And what is like super helpful for me is this saves me from having to jump through different incognito browsers, different locations. The consent actions really allows us to look at and understand, like, not only is something if this has like the no action, the accept, the opt out, and the reject, I guess, or opt in after that. So that's really cool because especially when you're in GDPR or looking at California regulations, and they're two different ones, but when you in California, if somebody gets a banner and then says no to that, you want to have some validation that stuff stops once you get that no flag. And it's very difficult, and that's where your standard consent management platform and all consent management platforms do have some external, they do have some scan that helps you to identify and discover cookies. But those technologies don't have the interaction with the banner that really gives you more confidence in your regulatory and your compliance with some of those regulations. So I did see in the chat the Q&A of is this a OneTrust replacement, or does this work with OneTrust? Well, I think Privado is very CMP agnostic, so they can work with any consent management platform. And it's all just publicly available data, and the data that they do collect, I think, again, can help you understand how any of your consent management platforms work, and is technology on top of, I would say, your existing consent platforms.
Yeah, like CMPs are like eventually became set and forget. The reality is there is a lot of things that continuously change. So Privado is like your auditor, web auditor. That's actually the name of our product as well. We have one for mobile app as well. But yeah, web auditor will allow you to put your website on a scheduled frequency, weekly, daily, monthly, where you can then subscribe to results coming out of it. Like, hey, did someone add a new script that led to 5 more issues? Or is my website now 100% compliant? In our experience, when we start with a customer, they start at this 40-45%, they reach 100, and then within a few weeks, they go back to 70, but then they go back to 100 as well. And this trend essentially help them defend it over time, as Rick was mentioning, that they can actually prove they have a governance program around their websites and not just like a cookie banner or a privacy policy they have. So there's someone who raised the hand. You can actually put the question in Q&A and we'll pick it up. Rick, I think you were saying something.
Yeah, so this is really useful for me to see this for a couple of reasons. One of them is recently I'm on a call with a client. My associate in California is also on the call, and we're looking at the cookie banner. And it turns out that she saw a different one than I did. Like, we see two different cookie banners. We didn't know this until I'm like, well, I'm not seeing, this link. And Maria says, oh no, I see the link. I'm like, oh, we got two different cookie banners? So they regionalized it. I don't know if they intended to or not, but they did. And one of them was problematic. And they were both had issues, but one of them was particularly problematic, which was the one I'm looking at. And I'm like, oh, you've got this problem. She's like, I don't see this problem. You don't have. Okay. There's no way for me to figure that out. I'm not going on to VPNs and doing that. That nobody wants to pay for me to do that.
Yeah.
Having something like this gives you a quick snapshot so you can understand things more easily, quickly, and then provide the right advice.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing. And I know, Rick, we talked about this before, but you're extremely technical. And I think that is so valuable for your clients, and I think that's awesome. I can also see that it's very expensive to have a partner going into your website and doing some of this audits that really honestly your internal team should be trained up to do, or if they're not trained up to do, you bring somebody else in who's going to be a lot who's going to be kind of tailored to that work. But this is yeah, I don't this was the first call that I've been on with a lawyer as technical and savvy as you to do that, but I know it's not always the case, or companies don't always want to look at that.
Yeah, it's hard, and no one wants to pay their lawyer to do this.
Yeah.
That's not the right use of resources. We give legal advice. I shouldn't be going and trying to figure that out. But the great thing is that there are tools that can help you to see what's going on, to give that right advice. Because maybe the company actually wants to use cookies, pixels, SDKs in a certain way. So then if I know that, I can provide advice on how to do that in a way that complies with the law.
Yep.
Right? If I don't know that, I can't give the right advice. So this helps me to know whether or not what I'm being told actually matches what the company's doing. Right? And it often is triggering an internal discussion about what the company actually wants to do.
Yeah.
That's a good conversation to be having, because then there's a business decision. The business decides what kind of risks they want to take, how they want to do certain types of things, and then I can give them advice on how to do it the right way. That's the right use of my time.
Yep.
Absolutely. Thanks, Rick. Thanks, Jake. So I think if there are any more questions, feel free to put it. But I think that brings us towards the end of the call. So if there are any last closing comments, Jake, from you and Rick, and then I can also close out. Let's do that. So over to you, Jake, for closing comments.
Yeah, I think really the whole name of the game now is there are a lot of teams out there, and there are a lot of regulators, actors who know a lot about the site. And your goal as internal to the organization should be, I don't think anybody external to the organization should know more than you about what's going on your website, about the processes that are going through. That's fundamental to like a privacy by design framework. And also these regulations are just going to get more intense and more complicated. So the more that you can clean up and understand what's going on internally to be able to present a better picture externally, I think that's where the main goal should be for any organization, especially like I said, as privacy continues to evolve and we get more regulations and more action in the industry.
Absolutely. Rick, any
Yeah,
last
and
comments?
I just say we've moved from basically a very low regulation environment for most companies to a moderate regulatory environment. By the way, this is moderate. It's not a bank. But when you have moderate regulation like this, you need to start putting together processes, procedures, compliance, and you need to do it in a way that is efficient and effective, isn't too complicated for the organization. And that's where you need to bring in the right set of tools and skill sets to do that, so that you can still make money, because that's the whole goal, is to make money. And there are ways to do that. And what you've seen on the side of the technology with Privado and Jake with his services really helped to get that to happen. So we should continue doing it.
Thanks, Rick. Thanks, Jake. And from my side, I would again like circle back to The external stuff, your website and app, is kind of the entry point for regulators. So that's the easy target. I would say we have technology for that. You can use our web and app auditors, request a free scan, and actually fix these things. And, because once they go in, then the cost of privacy program really goes up. Thanks everyone for joining and staying in and asking all the questions and putting in all that information in chat. The webinar will be sent to you. And thanks, Rick, and thanks, Jake, for sharing all the information. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.